Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on how to monitor application performance from the end user's perspective. By ways of introductions, you have myself, Stacy Leidwinger, who's part of the marketing team here at Goliath, as well as Yemi Ladyju, who's our senior technical consultant. Before we jump in, I do want to take care of some general housekeeping. In terms of agenda today, we're really going to talk about what's driving the need for application performance monitoring. Then we'll talk through how it can get deployed and show you an example of the software and the value it can provide. We'll wrap up then with a user story on how an organization applied this technology to overcome those challenges, and then we'll be taking Q&A at the end. So please, through the out, submit any questions you have in the questions box, and we'll make sure we get to them all at the end. One question we always get is, will this recording be available? Yes, within 24 hours, you will have this recording available in your inbox to review and potentially share with others if interested. So let's go ahead and get started. First, for anyone that is not familiar with Goliath, and I do see a few customers on today, so welcome. What Goliath offers is monitoring and troubleshooting software for the end user experience. And what that means is we have embedded intelligence and automation that will identify your entire IT infrastructure. It will automatically identify what to monitor and what thresholds to set so that you can be alerted anytime performance is exceeded in those areas. When organizations leverage this technology to monitor and troubleshoot their end user experience, it has the operational impact of hiring 2 to 3 full-time troubleshooting experts on their team. And every logo you see will validate that they've had that experience here on the screen today. As you can also see from the logos, we're able to scale and meet some of the largest deployments, as well as some of have the price profile and ease of use that will fit for small and medium-sized organizations. And finally, we do have a stronghold in healthcare. We are known as a health IT standard because we have business and technical relationships with all the major EHR vendors, Cerner, Epic, Allscripts, Meditech, and we can provide visibility across the end user experience, the IT infrastructure that may include Citrix, VMware Horizon, as well as those EHR applications. That's a little bit overview of Goliath, but now we're really going to talk about a specific component of Goliath, which is all about supporting front-end performance of those applications. So when I talk to many IT admins like yourselves, one of the biggest challenges that many face when supporting applications is really understanding that performance from an end user's perspective. Because when end users complain that their applications are slow or taking long to log into, often you can look at the operational or the infrastructure and say, well, everything looks fine on my end. And there you are as the admin kind of scratching your head around why. Did the user do something that impacted performance? Is it their home Wi-Fi connection? How exactly were they loading the application? And the reason that you're scratching your head is you just lack real data. Often when we're measuring performance, we stop once the desktop is created or rendered, whether that be through a fat client or a virtual desktop through Citrix or Horizon. And we often will stop even when the application is loaded. But where users often have problems and where IT has this blind spot is in how they're actually using the application. In fact, just last week I was on with a financial service customer, and what they literally said is, in today's world as IT, we have enough egg on our face. And these days, we can't wait for end users to complain about their applications taking too long to load, that they're slow, they're not working. We absolutely need to get ahead of these issues, and we just don't have a tool right now that is giving us enough perspective to know when our end users are struggling. So in order to solve these challenges, you really need purpose-built software that can monitor the front-end performance of these applications. Yemi, if you want to go to the next slide. And what this solution must do is you need to continually run tests. You can't just test things in the morning to make sure they're working, especially in this remote work world. People are working 24/7 all the time. So you need to continually run your tests to ensure that applications are working as users would expect. You also need to be able to be testing from that end user's perspective. It's not about just when the desktop rendered. It's actually when the application or desktop is ready to use for that end user. I was talking to an end user the other day and they said, I don't care that my desktop is ready. I'm still not ready to work. I don't consider my login complete until Outlook is open, Teams is open, OneNote is open. I want everything ready to go. That's when I'm ready to work. And that's what they consider their logon experience. It's the same thing when they're working within applications. And so you need to be able to test it. You need to look at it from the end user's perspective, and you need to be able to understand and proactively alert when thresholds are being exceeded, not just at load time, but actually clicking and working inside the application and knowing when different components or capabilities are not working and are slow. When we talk with our customers then, if we go to the next slide, where this comes up most often in terms of being critical is in 4 use cases. I already gave you one example, which is logon performance. Logon is something that we all struggle with, and even Goliath has a lot of tools that can assist with this. But one thing that has always been a gap out there is really the definition of logon from the end user versus IT. And so really from a user's perspective, you want to measure and have visibility into what they consider the logon. Just like I said, when they're launching all the applications and they're ready to start their day. For them, that's logon. And you need to understand that, you need to be able to test for it, and you need to be able to alert it when it's not working. The other big piece of this, and I've already hit, is really proactively alerting on the end user experience problems. And it's not just loading the application, it's working inside the application. We still have some health IT individuals on the phone today. It's when they're actually working in the EHR application, whether it be Epic, Meditech, Cerner, Allscripts, McKesson, and really understanding when they go to change an address for a patient, is the application working correctly? What if they're trying to update someone's insurance information? Common workflows that people are doing hundreds, if not 1,000 times a day, you want to be able to proactively alert if any of those workflows are not working properly. Another key use case is, as you well are aware and many of you face, your IT infrastructure is constantly changing. You're upgrading different programs. You're migrating workloads from on-premise into the cloud. And every time you make a change, you need to go through a series of tests to ensure performance remains the same or even improved. Often you're relying on some of your outside individuals to manually go through these tests. You might have pages and pages of tests. The challenge is it's very manual. It's time consuming for those that are doing it, and you typically go to the same people. So what happens? They're like, oh, I've run this test script 20 times now. I don't need to read it. And they start skipping steps. That's when errors are introduced. So you really want to automate that, especially when it's about how end users interact with an application. That is often today one of the areas that is not automated, and you want to start being able to automate it. And the fourth one really is related to number 3, where this becomes increasingly important if you're doing any type of major migration, whether it's an upgrade, migrating to a new tool, migrating from workloads from on-premises into the cloud. You absolutely want to be able to benchmark that performance from the end user's experience before migration and after migration to make sure it doesn't have negative impact. All of us have experienced a failed launch because we didn't catch something that had major negative impact on that end user experience. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Yemi. And Yemi, can you talk a little bit about how this technology is deployed, and then jump in and show it to our audience today?
Absolutely. So before we go into the technology, as Stacy mentioned, we're just going to quickly talk about how this technology is deployed. If we look here on the screen, there are essentially 3 components to the technology. There is the central console, which of course can be deployed in your data center, can be deployed in the cloud. And this is going to be, of course, your console for setting up alerts, reports, for viewing your sessions and your scenarios that are taking place in your tests from all of your different locations. If you look in the middle of the screen, we have something called the scenario builder. And this is the portion of the technology that you're going to use to build out your scenarios, build out your test cases, and those workflows that you're going to be testing and replicating from different locations on an ongoing basis. And we'll focus there, and we'll start the demonstration at that specific portion of the technology. And then finally, we have our scenario stations. And these are the machines that are typically deployed at different locations, right? So whether it's at a specific branch location, whether it's in a cloud, whether it's at a particular office, and those are the locations or machines that are going to be logging on and continuously testing the application and giving you the performance metrics on that. So with that, let's jump into the demonstration. And as I mentioned, we're going to start off talking about our scenario station, or excuse me, the scenario builder, which is the technology that is used to create these launches. So of course, when we're talking about testing the applications, testing workflows from a front-end perspective, it's important to be able to leverage the tools that can enable that to be done very efficiently. So in this case, Scenario Builder is going to leverage optical image recognition to allow you to record what the user is potentially going to be doing inside of their session, and then replicate that, build it out in sort of a script functionality, so that can then be so you can then monitor specific transaction times. You can replicate this. You can create global scripts and even test for failures while you're setting this up. So to give you some example as sort of as to how this is actually created, we can go through a test case and talk about, what would actually take place for, a specific launch. So if I wanted to create a launch now, all I have to do is click record. And once I click on record, essentially Scenario Builder is going to record what I'm doing on the screen. So I can then go over to a specific icon on the screen, right? I can click on a button, go through specific areas, and do essentially anything that a user would normally do within a specific technology. So go to maybe sign out or something like that, right? Hit that, and when I'm done, I can hit close here, and essentially everything that I just did has been recorded and put into my scenario. So now I could, of course, run a test on this, and just by quickly playing it and seeing if it's going to exactly replicate what I just did, which it should do. And once it's done, and once I'm able to test this and validate that this has been done correctly, then I can send it up to our scenario, to our central console, for it to be replicated at different locations. One thing I wanted to point out is that essentially with this optical image recognition, you're able to essentially do or work with any application or do anything that on a machine that a user would be able to do, whether that is open up PDFs or open up a Citrix session or something like that. Essentially anything that can be done by a user can be replicated with this technology, which makes it very powerful. So I actually have here a Citrix launch that we can just quickly run through and show you exactly how that presents here. So what I'm going to do here is quickly just run this particular launch, and what we'll see here is this is going to open up a web browser to a NetScaler or storefront page. It's then going to log in using credentials, exactly the same way an end user would. And a lot of our customers use this to test Citrix delivered applications, use this to test other applications, whether those are on-premises applications as well. If there is a failure similar to this, what you can do is you can hit on the Smart Image Configurator, and you can essentially configure this on the fly to make sure, of course, that this is going to work as efficiently for you as possible. And then you can continue to play, and what we should see is this will continue and log on into a Citrix session, open up the desktop, and continue to sort of take actions within the application itself. So once you've sort of configured this to work in the manner that you expect it to, you can then quickly send that back up to your scenario, central console, and then we can flip over here to the console here, where you now have a dashboard of all of your different scenarios that you're testing from different locations. You can click on any one of these dashboards to get details into each one of those launches. So here you can see a trend line of availability. If there are failures, you can actually see what's presenting on the screen at those cases, right? So in this case, I can see exactly what it was looking for, why it failed, so that I can sort of continue, or I can first of all, get ahead of those things before users start to complain about them. And secondly, I have, screenshot evidence, right? So I know exactly what error messages would present to the users in those cases. Of course, you also have details into uptime and availability, giving you performance metrics based on the different transactions that are inside of the launches as well. So from an end user perspective, you have essentially data on all of those pieces that go into their front end their front end performance. And these are things that you can track and trend over time with reports as well. The alerting functionality is very robust as well. You have the ability to maybe not alert on one failure. Maybe that could be sort of a false positive, or just things took a little bit longer than normal. But then if it failed 3 or 4 times, that's of course indicative of a major issue, and that's when you can sort of get an alert. So all of those things are all configurable here from the central console, so that you could essentially get full details and performance of the front end from a front end perspective for any application that you're delivering or desktop that you're delivering, whether that is via Citrix, VMware Horizon, or a local application as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to Stacy, and we can talk about some success stories.
Great, thank you, Yemi. So what I wanted to talk about today is how a global investment firm really used this technology. And what they were challenged with was end users continued to complain of slow logons. So they were actually using Goliath. They had brought Goliath in. They were seeing that the logon times were looking good in their Citrix environment. There seemed to be no issue there. Everything seemed to be performing, yet end users were still complaining. And what it really came down to was it was not the end user experience that IT was defining that was the problem. It was really the experience as end users were discussing. And there were specific applications that were being deployed. And when they went to go click into those applications, it was taking a lot of time to go ahead and get the logon process to do common workflows. And so what they really wanted to do was able to, again, monitor logon from that end user's perspective and make sure that it wasn't just about getting into Citrix is a desktop environment, it was actually launching the applications that they needed to launch in order to do their day-to-day business. And when they started doing that, they did start to find performance issues within some of those applications. Some of them were lacking memory, some of them were lacking disk space. And what they did is they proactively then set up alerts so that if issues did arise, they would be notified immediately and could address them. And so what they were able to do by leveraging the software is really to not only measure that experience, but they were able to go ahead and address issues before end users even complained. And this was getting a lot more visibility than they had within event and system logs, because those often weren't really showing what the application was doing. So as Yemi showed, when you build out these scenarios, you can really get that next level of depth of understanding of what the end user is facing. So with that then, we did want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. And so what we'd like to do is kind of move then into that session. So we had a few questions come in. If others have come in as well, please do submit them. So Yemi, here's the first one. Someone's asking, I think this has to do with the scenario builder you were showing. What happens if a launch fails? Will it still open up on the screen?
Yeah, that is a question that comes up a lot, right? So for instance, there's a failed launch, and so on that machine that that the scenario, or on that scenario station, is there going to be, an open session on that screen? So yeah, and the answer to that question is you can actually build out on failure conditions that could close out the different applications, or close the sessions out, in the case where one of the workflows actually fails. So every single script can be set up with a non-failure condition that could pretty much just do close out, whether that's log off from Citrix or close the application or log out of the application itself, so that, you know, in the event where there's an application error or failure, you don't just have an open application on a machine.
Great. We have another question that came in. Can the user themselves record the scenario?
This is going to be something that's done by IT or by the QA department. This is something where, you know, it's not running on individual user sessions or individual user machines. You have a designated machine that you call your application launcher. And that's where the launch is going to take place. So typically this is run by the Citrix team or the application team, just to make sure that the applications are up and running. However, you know, of course, what we see is the teams building out scenarios based on how users access the environment. So if they're going to be, for instance, in an EHR application, going to, you know, they have a certain workflow or scenario for admitting a patient, or looking up their patient records and things like that. Those can then be built into scenarios to mimic what a typical user would do, so that you're able to fully test the functionality and the performance of the application, you know, 24/7 on sort of an ongoing basis.
What I would add to that as well, going back to the short user story I went through, when I talked with them about how did they come up with the scenarios, they did go to their trusted user groups, right? The ones that had already created many of the manual testing that they had done in the past, and really try to identify then what were some of those common workflows. And Yemi, this actually leads into another question that has come in. How long does it take to build out a scenario?
Yeah, so it depends, of course, on the complexity of the scenario, right, of the workflow. As you could see, it's very easy because you can essentially just do everything that the user that a user would do, and it will record you, so you don't have to leverage any coding, you don't have to leverage any anything like that. But you know, of course, if you're testing a scenario that it will take a user probably 30 minutes to do, then of course your scenarios is going to be a lot more complicated or a lot more complex, which might require a little bit more time. However, there are a lot of things that can make it easy, like for instance, leveraging global scripts. So if you've already created a portion of that script for a different scenario, you can import it into the scenario that you're building now, and start working from there. So a lot of the things that can be replicated can be sort of put into the launches, so you don't have to build scripts from scratch or build scenarios from scratch every single time.
Great. And Yemi, I think another one kind of falls into the same bucket is how many scenarios can you test in a single day?
And again, that depends on your environment or the scenarios that you're building. You can run these every minute on a single machine. So if you have shorter scenarios that take 30 seconds, 45 seconds to run, you can actually run this every minute in the environment. So again, it just depends on the length of the scenario. But as far as configurability, it's, you know, you can do it every minute if you would like to.
Mm-hmm. So kind of follow up to that is many of our scenarios can take 5 or more minutes. So often should Goliath execute those scenarios to test every 10 minutes or more?
Yeah, I mean, that's 5 minutes is typically you know, what we see as far as the average for the launches. So yeah, you know, we've seen customers test every 10 minutes, every 7 minutes. You know, it's really configurable by you. And keep in mind though that you could be testing one application from multiple different areas, right? So those can all be happening concurrently from different machines or from different locations in your environment as well.
Great. Kind of next question, Yemi, is does this require you to use Citrix?
No, it does not require you to use Citrix. This is any application or any sort of workflow that can be done on a PC. This can pretty much replicate. So you don't have to use Citrix. We have customers that use Citrix, of course, to test Citrix delivered applications, but we also have customers that test web apps, customers that test Horizon, VMware Horizon applications, RDS, so on and so forth.
And then related to this is there's a question around, does this work for testing performance of Epic?
Absolutely, yeah. Epic typically is delivered via Citrix, yeah, absolutely. A lot of our customers, as I mentioned before, will test specific workflows for EHR applications. So Epic, Cerner, you name it, any application that the user can possibly use.
Next question is, are there reports that come with this tool?
Yes, absolutely. So we have a number of different reports that will give you, information about uptime and availability, give you information about overall performance and the different transaction times. So yes, it does come with the alerting functionality, as well as the ability for you to schedule reports, as well as run reports on demand.
And then Yemi, I feel like this question comes up almost anytime we do one of these webinars together is, how is this priced?
Sure, yeah. So the pricing is fairly simple. There's a base package that is going to include, one central console or controller. It's going to include one scenario builder, and as well as one scenario station. And then as you add scenario builders or machines that you can sort of configure launches from, and scenario stations, which would be the machines that are going to be launching applications on a scheduled basis, those can all be added a la carte. So you have a base package with all three components, and then as you need additional components, you can add those as well.
Great. We have one more that's come in, but please keep sending them. This question is asking, does this replace the Goliath logon simulator? Yemi, I can take this and maybe you can expand on it, right? So Goliath has a lot of different capabilities that can do different things. If you're only testing the availability of kind of your Citrix infrastructure or availability of the applications, then that Goliath application monitoring, as you know it, fits that scenario. If you're looking to get closer inside the application, then this does have the potential to do both. And that's just something that we'd want to have kind of that one-on-one discussion with you. And so one of the reasons we've built this into our portfolio is we've heard from many of our customers that they wanted to see beyond just the launch into the actual use. So we're happy to have a follow-up conversation on that. Yemi, anything you would add there?
Yeah, I think that's spot on, right? The application availability monitor does a really good job of testing Citrix and and sort of the functionality of Citrix to make sure that those and of course VMware Horizon to make sure that those components are working in the delivery. This will just allow you to take it further into the application testing, and from a front end perspective, the performance of the application itself.
Okay. And we did have another one come in, and I love this. We've had lots of engagement today. The next question here is, how many scenario builders do you need, and why would you want more than one?
Sure, yeah, this technology is very heavily used in sort of cross-departmental fashion. So a lot of times, you have customers, that would have multiple teams leveraging the technology. In those cases, then of course you don't want to have them all share the same machine to build out scenarios. So in some of those cases, having multiple machines that have scenario builders it can definitely be a lot easier to support, especially when you have multiple different teams. It's just another area where if you have multiple, users that are going to be creating launches, so that they're not, leveraging the same console at the same time, you can sort of work with that. But for the most part, one typically does the trick, if it's just one team. But if you do have multiple teams, this can support that.
Great, and we had another one come in. Can you tie or track the metrics from which Citrix server, if the Goliath data is being used, it's connected to complement and help troubleshoot any issue?
Sure, yeah, keep in mind, right? So these are all going to be Citrix sessions, correct? So if you have the Goliath, these are all going to be actual Citrix sessions, right? So if you have the Goliath performance monitor, you'll actually be able to take a look at, the ICA metrics and the connection speed metrics and the network latency metrics for this session, because this is, of course, a Citrix session. So if you're using this technology to launch a Citrix session or to test a Citrix delivered application, you'll be able to still monitor the session as far as from a performance perspective, from a Citrix performance perspective, inside of the Goliath console as well, which a lot of our customers are doing right now, because of course you have additional data. You have the front end performance app, on one side, and then you have the overall Citrix perspective, performance, within the Goliath console.
Great. Yemi, I think that is the last one that I see here, but if other questions have come up, if you'd like to have a conversation to learn more, see a more fully functioning demo, or even take this technology in-house to trial, please email techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com. Or if you're one of our customers, because I do see a few of you and you've had some of the questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your customer success manager, and they'd be more than happy to extend a demo or extend the conversations that we've been having here today. But Yemi, I want to thank you today for having another great webinar and content. I hope all of you have found this valuable. And again, do not hesitate to email us if you're looking for more details. Thank you and have a great, Halloween tomorrow. Bye, everyone.